Guys, we're so back. Week 2 of the NFL preseason is rolling, which means in just mere days, the regular season is going to be kicking off. And if you're anything like me, that means the next few weeks will be full of fantasy football drafts. Today, I'm here to help you get ready for those drafts. We'll be talking draft strategy. I'll be breaking down the market, tell you how I'm going to be approaching my drafts in 2026. Without further ado, my name is Michael O'Hara. This is the Average Fantasy Football Take Show. Let's get right into it. Before we do get rolling, I do have something of a disclaimer to make. I made a video not too long ago talking about draft philosophy, where I broke down ideas like drafting for upside, how to properly utilize your bench slots, and the importance of just building a coherent team. I would highly recommend go checking out that video alongside this one, because I think those two go hand in hand. And arguably, that video on philosophy is more important because you can understand the ADP landscape. You can have a good strategy. You can have good player takes. But if you're not building teams optimally and in a way that's conducive to success in this sort of format of fantasy football, I think that you're doing yourself a disservice. So be sure to go check out that video as well. I think if you watch both of them, you'll be set up in a really, really good way. That is all on that front. Let's jump right into the actual draft strategy portion of this video. I'm going to start things off with my general observations and takeaways about what ADP is throwing at us this season. I lied. One more thing to say really quick. Before you jump into your draft, please, please, please make sure you understand and have read through your league's settings. If you're starting 3 wide receivers, obviously receivers become more valuable. If you're in a shallower league, elite onesies like Brock Bowers and Josh Allen become more valuable because you can still keep up at running back and wide receiver while having the positional advantage that one of those guys gives you. So make sure you look through your league settings, understand how that might influence how you should approach the draft. But I promise that's it. Let's pull up the ADP draft grid and talk about the landscape this year. Okay, here we have it, the current drafting landscape. This is consensus ADP sorted into a drafting grid. Before I start talking about my observations, my takeaways, my thoughts on what we're being thrown this year, first, 2 quick shout outs. First, Nick Ercolano of BDG, my guy over there. He just did a draft strategy video of his own. He presented it in a similar fashion visually with this draft grid type of presentation. Really liked what he did over there. Be sure to go check out his video on the matter. So doing something similar, at least from a visual and stylistic perspective. Then big shouts to Claude. Helped me put together this visual for the grid. So let's jump right into it. I am going to first walk through some of my takeaways and observations about the market this year. The obvious one that jumps right off the page is that running backs are back. Running backs are back. We're rolling back the clock a decade because it's basically all running backs in the first few rounds of drafts. You see Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, CMC, Jonathan Taylor. First 2 rounds littered with running backs. This year, the RB12, which is Kenneth Walker, is drafted with the 9th overall pick. He goes at the 207 in terms of consensus ADP. Last year, there were just 9 running backs off the board by the 19th pick. So 3 more running backs getting pushed up into the first round and a half-ish of drafts this year, which is pretty notable. Furthermore, 3 more running backs taken in the first 3 rounds this year versus last year. So we get to the RB18 this year by the end of the 3rd round, which is Cam Skattebo this year. Last year, there was only 15 running backs coming off the board in the first 3 rounds. So pretty big discrepancy there once again. The other one that jumps off the page pretty immediately, in my opinion, is that there is very, very little interest in elite quarterbacks this year. You've got Josh Allen going at the 211 in terms of consensus ADP, but outside of him, it's really nothing. Lamar Jackson goes here at the 406, and then we've got this cluster of Drake May, Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts through the mid-5th into the early 6th. But over the last few years, we've grown pretty accustomed to seeing a couple of quarterbacks going in the first 3 rounds, whether it be Allen, whether it be Lamar. Joe Burrow has even pushed his way up the board. Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels have all been elite quarterbacks who have been drafted quite highly. The market's not very interested in that this year. I think it is largely driven by so many of the high-end options were injured last year. Lamar, Burrow, and Daniels basically all have lost seasons. And I do think, I talked about it in a previous video, I do think that the market is over-indexing on those injuries. So it's definitely a big difference how you play it. That's something that we'll talk about. But it's something to adapt to. There's no doubt about that. Very, very little interest in the high-end quarterbacks. Can get them at cheap prices relative to the last few years. The other one that really, really sticks out to me, and one that will definitely influence my draft strategy to a pretty significant degree, as we get into the late fourth, the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth rounds, the middle rounds of drafts, the wide receiver profiles are far more intriguing to me than the running back profiles. So we've got guys here in the fourth and fifth round at running back that I do like. I really think DeAndre Swift is pretty undervalued. Travion Henderson fits some teams that go running back heavy early on. I like Bashal Tootin and Jadarian Price a lot. But generally speaking, there is a lot more wide receivers that I'm interested in. Jalen Waddle, Ladd McConkey, Luther Burden. I think at this cost, Terry McLaurin is interesting. J-Mo, Mike Evans is far too cheap. Christian Watson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Parker Washington is a smash in the early seventh. So I do think that is going to make me want to go a lot more running back heavy in the early rounds. We'll break it down further. But you need to understand as you progress into your drafts, there are going to be a lot more interesting wide receivers as opposed to running backs. So I'm really going to want to have running backs sorted out earlier on, because I know I'm going to want to be hammering wide receiver in this range as opposed to running back. Just not that many running backs that I'm interested in taking. Not super interested in Jaylen Warren when the 1v1 is like Marvin Harrison or Christian Watson. Tony Pollard, just not a guy that I like whatsoever. Ramondre Stevenson, Rico Dowdle, Chuba Hubbard. I'd much rather have the wide receivers. That's enough on that point, though. The last big time one is that the late rounds, once you get to rounds 10, 11, 12, and beyond, there are very few ambiguous backfields to take advantage of. And once again, I do think that is going to influence how I approach running back. I'm going to want to get it hammered away early, because in my opinion, there's not a Chase Brown this year. There's not a Bucky Irving this year. Some guy taking over the backfield and absolutely smashing. I'm having a hard time seeing that. There are handcuff options, of course, but there's very few true ambiguous backfields that I'm interested in investing in that come super cheap. Jonathan Brooks is priced up. He's going to continue shooting up draft boards, especially if he plays well in the preseason. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who I do think is a solid pick, but he's priced up to a degree. He goes in the 10th round. It's not like a freebie bet that you can make. He's here at the 10:08. Jordan Mason, he's a palatable price in my opinion, one that I'm interested in making. I think that there's a path to him being a really rock solid pick, but I do think that the upside is limited. He doesn't catch many passes. I do think Aaron Jones, almost no matter what, barring injury, is going to play a factor in this backfield just because he's so much of a more solid pass catcher. And I do think they will want to give him some rushing work. The only one that really stands out as someone who's like stone cold free and could emerge from an ambiguous situation, it is Jonah Coleman, the Denver Broncos rookie running back. Coleman goes here at the 14-10. He, like I said, he's one of the only guys who's like stone cold free that I could see emerging from a backfield into a prominent fantasy relevant role. But still, you kind of have to tell yourself a story that I don't see as super realistic. You think either J.K. Dobbins is washed or just bank on the injury-prone narrative, and you think that R.J. Harvey is basically a pass catcher and change of pace kind of back. It's a thin bet, in my opinion, but he's really the only one that stands out as a guy who can win a backfield that we like for fantasy football and really smash. And it's still not one that I'm super interested in making. Like, you see these guys who are going in the 12th, the 13th rounds. It's guys with either limited profiles or they're not in good offenses. Woody Marks, I know he looked good in the preseason, but what's he offering you in a bell cow role if he wins out in the backfield or if David Montgomery misses time? There's just not that many upside-driven bets in terms of ambiguous situations or just generally guys in this range. So the lack of ambiguous targets that are cheap and interesting, that will once again be influencing my draft strategy this year. The final small point to make is that you see defenses and kickers throughout the middle rounds here. It starts in the 8th round with the Houston Texans defense. You get Brandon Aubrey, the Dallas Cowboys kicker, at the 9:02. Please don't be that guy. Please don't be that guy. Don't draft a kicker and a defense if you're drafting now. And if you're drafting really close to the season, take them with your last few picks. It's been proven time and time again that kickers and defenses, they can be streamed week to week, especially defenses. You just don't need to waste real draft capital on these guys when you can play the matchups, grind the waiver wires, and get starting caliber or even high-end production. Just lock in, guys. Lock in, take a chance on a potential breakout with one of these picks, and then lock in the regular season and just grind the matchups in the waiver wires. That's really all it takes to keep up with your league mates at those positions if you have them in your league. So please don't be that guy who takes a kicker and a defense before we even hit the double-digit rounds. It's just not worth it. The upside just isn't there. But that will do it in terms of my general observations and notes from the overall market. From here, we are going to jump into positional breakdowns, starting with wide receiver and running back, and then moving to the onesies, quarterback and tight end. Okay, so at running back and wide receiver, there are two big thoughts and opinions that I have that are influencing how I'm approaching drafts, especially in the early rounds. So at running back, it's really what we were talking about earlier. Running back talent and guys that I'm interested in taking, it just dries up so quickly. Once you get past like Bashal Tutin and Jadarian Price, it gets really thin. The bets lack upside. There are obviously some guys I like. Like I like to take swings on Jonathan Brooks. I like JCM as well. There are some like handcuff driven bets that I think are too cheap, like Tank Bigsby and a Marshawn Lloyd. So there are ones to make, but there's just not that many. There's not that many to choose from. There's very, very few running backs that I am interested in taking once you get past like the Jadarian Price. That's kind of where the cliff is, in my opinion. So that makes me really want to make sure the running back position is sorted out within these first couple of rounds. The thing that I keep coming back to is I refuse to get left behind at running back. I just won't do it. You can play it in a number of ways. I've seen a lot of people advocating for 2 running backs through the first 3 rounds. I think that's viable, but really I just want to make sure I have my RB2 sorted out by the time Jadarian Price comes off the board here in the early 6th round. That's the only real hard and fast rule that I would apply to the running back position is please don't get boxed out, because there is just such a talent drop off. And then you can talk about the league wide trends, how passing volume is taking a dive. Running back production is up. Running backs have been, by and large, over the last few years, some of the more valuable fantasy football assets. So I want to have 2 guys with real upside and quality profiles at a minimum on my team. I think you can even add a 3rd before the 6th round is up. Still, please make sure you have your starters locked in by the time we hit the cliff here at Jadarian Price. It's an absolute must, or else you are going to be in a pretty precarious situation, because like I was talking about, there's just not that many guys who are in ambiguous situations. You're just banking on injuries. Like I like stashing guys like Lloyd, Bigsby, Keaton Mitchell on my bench. I think those are really solid stashes, and I think that they're too cheap. Ray Davis is another one on that list for me. They're too cheap, but you still have to luck your way into an injury. So I really want to have my running backs sorted out pretty early in draft. That is a pretty big change for me. I have been aboard the running backs don't matter train for years now, but this is what the market is giving us. The market is offering us very few interesting profiles through the middle and late rounds. So you can still try and pick off those guys like a JCM and some of those other mid to late round guys that I have talked about. RJ Harvey is on that list for me. You can try and pick off those guys, but in a snake draft where you're not going to have access to everyone, where there's so few interesting bets, I don't want to risk getting boxed out. My other note on running back is that we still have to be selective about the profiles and the guys that we're taking, just because I think it's important to have your starting running backs sorted out by the 6th round. That doesn't mean we should just slap anyone onto our rosters. We still have to be price sensitive, and we still have to make good bets. So I'm not going to pull up just questionable profiles and guys that I'm not interested in just for the sake of filling out my running back slot. So the handful of guys that jump off the page for me, first and foremost, Javonte Williams at the 308. This is something that Ben Gretsch, someone who I really respect their work, go check him out on Twitter and his Substack if you have not. Something that he talks about all the time is that if we see running backs or just players in general break out and then the market doesn't respect it, they don't push them all the way up into the first, second rounds, there's reason to be skeptical. I think that applies to Javonte Williams. He's not a pass catcher. I don't think incredibly highly of a talent. I'm not going to completely write off what he did last year. He was incredibly impressive. And if you drafted a ton of him, you had some phenomenal teams. Still, it's not a bet I'm interested in making at the 308. He's not good enough, in my opinion, and he doesn't have a complete of enough profile with the lack of the pass catching juice to justify this draft capital. Cam Skattebo at the 312 is also not particularly interesting to me, less so about his individual talent as opposed to his situation. He is coming off of an injury that is pretty significant. They bring in Najee Harris. They have Tyrone Tracy. I do think that the wheels could just fall off for this offense as a whole. So I'm not really interested at this price. If he gets down here into like the Bucky Irving, Quinshon Judkins range of your draft, that is more palatable in my opinion. I'm not pulling him up to the 312 ahead of guys like Egbuka, McMillan, Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, Colston Loveland, Lamar Jackson. That's just not going to happen for me. Quinshon Judkins, another one. It's a very similar story to Cam Skattebo. I'm just not paying this price for a guy who, even though they're going to function as a bell cow, is basically the 2-down back for what could very well be the worst offense in the league this year. We know Dylan Sampson is going to be the go-to pass catcher. That's not really going to go to Quinshon Judkins. He's going to be a bell cow. He's going to consolidate all the rushing work. What's that look like in the Cleveland Browns offense? And what does Judkins individually look like after he's coming off that leg injury? I'm skeptical. So I'm not gonna use one of my early round picks on a guy with real holes in his profile. It's just not gonna happen for me. So those are just a couple of the examples. But the big point is be selective about who you're taking. Don't take a running back pick just to fill out the roster slot. Take guys with real upside. Take guys who you think are talented and have paths to top 6 finishes, top 3 finishes, RB1 finishes. Those are the guys that we need to target with our early round running back picks. So just don't fill out the roster slot for the sake of doing it. That is my other message on the running back position in the early rounds. Okay, I know I rambled for a little while there, but a few minutes ago, I did say that I had a point, something that I was really considering that was influencing how I was approaching the wide receiver position. Got to go back to full screen to talk about this one. Got a few graphics to show, but it's really that the wide receiver 2 died last year. You had some really, really elite wide receiver 1s, but after that, it was like wide receiver 2 production was flat across the board. It was bad compared to previous years. So the wide receiver 2 just didn't really exist. They were all just the same. The tier was flat. They weren't providing difference-making production. So I don't think that that's going to change in 2026. I think we still see the similar league-wide trends where passing volume is on the decline. Teams are leaning on the rushing attack to a larger degree. So I think it's going to be more of the same where after you get past like the top 10, top 12 guys, you're not going to have real difference makers on your roster. So that makes me want to go out and find one of those difference makers. And I want to have an elite wide receiver, a hero wide receiver on my team, whether that be one of those guys in the early rounds, Jamar, Puka, JSN, Amon-Ra, CD, Justin Jefferson, even AJ Brown and Drake London, in my opinion, fit that mold. You can make the argument for Malik Neighbors as well. I am well ahead of the market on Malik Neighbors. I have him as a second round pick. You get him here in the middle of the third. Even Nico Collins, after this Jaden Higgins injury, can fit that mold. So I'm really intrigued to spend an early round pick on a guy who I believe can be a top 10 wide receiver. That because I do think that it's going to be incredibly valuable. There are only going to be a handful to a dozen guys who really separate from the pack at the wide receiver position because of what I was talking about, wide receiver 2 scoring, falling off the cliff, pass volume down, all those reasons. I think we see that again where there's just a select group of guys who separate themselves from a pack. If you have one of those guys, that is going to be a massive advantage in your league. So I want to have at least one. I want to take a stab at one in the first or the second round, even the third, with guys like Collins and Neighbors. And then as we move down into the middle rounds, I want to take stabs at guys who could tier jump. They could emerge like JSN last year, obviously not to the degree, but they're taken in the middle rounds and they finish as a top 6, top 10 guy. That's who I want to target in the middle rounds. Let me go back to the draft board here really quick, though. So it's really all coming together. I want to have my running backs sorted out, take on quality profiles. I want to have a guy from the first 2-3 rounds who I believe can be a top 10 receiver. And then in rounds 4, 5, and 6, I do want to take 1 or 2 stabs at a guy who can tier jump, whether that be like a Ladd, a Jalen Waddle, a Teteroa McMillan, a Luther Burden, a JMO, one of those guys who I think has a path to a top 10, top 8 season that's going in the middle round. So a couple running backs, a high-end wide receiver, and then a couple of tier jumping stabs, tier jumping dart, not necessarily a dart throw, but a guy with an upside driven profile. So I think that there's multiple ways to play it. You can get it figured out because you can go with a running back in the first round. You go with Jahmyr Gibbs or a Bijan Robinson. You can pair him with a Nico Collins and a Malik Neighbors at the 2-3 turn, and then come back with a guy like DeAndre Swift or even pull up Bashal Tutin. In the middle rounds here, you can go Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, and get a running back faller here in the second round, whether it be Ken Walker or Derrick Henry, or you can grab a guy like Jeremiah Love in the third round to start getting your running back room ironed out. Later on the board, you can go running back to start. And then you can get guys like Devonta Smith, Zay Flowers, the guys we were talking about earlier, Ladd, Jalen Waddle here at the 3-4 turn, Emeka Egbuka, Teteroa McMillan as well. So I think that there's no hard and fast rule for me. You just have to pivot based on your draft slot. I just want to have running back sorted out, a guy who I think has access to a top 6 season, and then guys who are drafting a little bit later that I think can tier jump at the position. So there's multiple ways to play that. That's just how I want to go about running back and wide receiver in the middle rounds. Moving further down the board in the later rounds, really all I'm doing at running back and wide receiver is I'm taking stabs at handcuff running backs because, like I said earlier, we just don't have that many guys in ambiguous situations. So I'm taking the handcuffs. I'm taking the Tank Bigsby's. I'm taking Keaton Mitchell's an interesting one as well. He's not necessarily a handcuff, but a really good talent in an interesting situations. But the handcuffs, the Tank Bigsby's, the Marshawn Lloyds, the Ray Davises of the world, the guys who, if the starter goes down, they're pretty good. They're going to consolidate the rushing work. They're talented individually to a degree, and they're in awesome offenses. So those are the kinds of handcuff running backs I'm taking. And then I'm not taking veteran wide receivers. If we've seen multiple years of these guys and they're still going in the late rounds of drafts, there's just no point in taking them, like the Jerry Judys of the world. It's just Juwan Johnson. There's just no point to take them. They're already proven commodities. They're just not going to be awesome guys. If I'm going to take wide receiver in this range, it's going to be rookies or second-year players who are legitimate breakout candidates. So handcuff running backs, guys in semi-ambiguous situations, or like the one asterisk is Keaton Mitchell. And then potential breakout wide receivers who are largely going to be rookies and sophomores. That's how I am playing it in the later rounds. That was a long spiel, a little bit of rambling, but let's jump over to the quarterback position. At quarterback this year, my approach is relatively straightforward. I'm either waiting for a falling elite quarterback, or I'm just waiting entirely and I'm going to scoop someone up later in the draft. So I'm not really interested in taking Josh Allen at the 211, but if he falls to the mid-third, I'll scoop him up there. Lamar Jackson, if he falls into the 5th, great value. Drake May, Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts. If any of them are there in the 6th, I'm just going to take them. I will say my favorite click on the board far and away is Jaden Daniels. He goes here at the end of the 5th round based on consensus ADP. I have him ranked as an early 5th round pick. I think he should be going somewhere over here in this range. But really, generally speaking, I'm just waiting to see if I can get any of these guys to slip If they do, I'm going to really take any of them. Doesn't really matter to me. My one flag plant is Jaden Daniels, so he is my preferred target, really in the 5th round or even the 6th. If you can get him there, that is the guy I would target of this bunch. But if I can't get access to any of these guys, I'm really going to wait. You talk to people who have dialed in projections and are really dialed into all of this in general. There's not really a difference between the guys from like Matthew Stafford all the way down to like Malik Willis's and the Tyler Shucks of the world. Ahead of time, when you project things out and you build expectations for what these guys are going to do in season, it's not that big of a gap. Obviously, some of those guys will emerge from this tier and become really valuable fantasy assets. But ahead of time, it seems worthwhile to wait just because of how thin the difference is in terms of where I rank them and how I view their overall outlook. So if you don't get one of these guys from the top 6, anyone from Josh Allen, if you get a fall, anyone till Jalen Hurts, I'm really just going to be waiting at quarterback and plucking off a value, a faller. I like guys like Brock Purdy. I think Bo Nix has an interesting outlook because he can run the ball. Jared Goff, given the poor quality of the Lions defense and the super soft schedule, he could absolutely smash. There's talks of Jordan Love and the Packers being more pass heavy this year, and we've seen him be incredibly efficient over the course of his career. Kyler Murray, we know he has rushing upside, and he's playing alongside an elite cast of weapons with a head coach who has gotten the most out of quarterbacks year after year, with the exception that is JJ McCarthy. So there's a lot of upside and quality bets to make where you can just wait. You don't need to be scrambling. That's the one piece of advice I would have, is do not scramble. If the elites come off the board, if Jalen Hurts is gone, do not pull up guys and make reaches just to fill out your quarterback slot. Similar to what we were talking about with the running backs, allow the other guys to scramble, allow them to make bad picks, ignore ADP, ignore expectations, ignore rankings, just so they can have their starting quarterback. The only note and caveat that I will have, I'll have two. If you draft an elite quarterback, please don't draft a backup. I talked about that in my draft philosophy video. It's just much more worthwhile to take a stab at a running back or a wide receiver in the late rounds. And then the other thing is to understand that you should be in the heads of your league mates. If you know that your league mates are inclined to take backup quarterbacks into quarterback leagues, maybe don't wait super, super long time to grab your first quarterback. Maybe pull them up a little bit. Don't get too egregious. Don't get too aggressive with it. But if you know, if people are hungry for a backup quarterback for no good reason, even though I think it's a bad idea, if your league tends to take a ton of backups, make sure you prioritize that a little bit more. The other and last and final point I'll have here on quarterback is, if you are going to wait, I would throw 2 darts, and I would take 2 guys who have different sort of outlooks. I would take one guy where I'm spinning the roulette wheel on touchdown percentage, touchdown rate. I would take a guy like Brock Purdy, who has historically had a really, really high touchdown rate, because we know in this range of drafts, the guys who emerge and are smashes are the guys who just have outlier touchdown rates. They get to 7%, 8%, 6.5%, whatever it is. They're the ones who really smash. So I would get someone who looks like they could have a really high touchdown rate, whether that be Brock Purdy, Matt Stafford, Trevor Lawrence, Baker Mayfield, Jordan Love. Pair one of those pocket passers and just hope you hit on that roulette wheel, and then add alongside a rushing quarterback, someone with real legs, whether that be Jackson Dart or Malik Willis. Those are the 2 that obviously stand out. Bo Nix to a degree as well. Kyler Murray. So I would try and blend the 2 archetypes together, add a pocket passer who can run hot on touchdowns, and then add someone who has legs, can add something in the rushing department. That is, if you're going to wait and draft 2 quarterbacks, try and take one of each. That's just how I like to go about things. Okay, finally, we have tight end, and it's a similar story to me for quarterback. I really would like access to one of the top guys if I can get them at a value. You can't have everything. You can't have both an elite tight end and an elite quarterback, but I do think there's some spots where we can get quality guys onto our roster and not sacrifice what we're doing at running back and wide receiver too heavily. I do like the prices on Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. I have them in relatively similar ranges in my ranking. I do have Bowers tight end 1 and McBride tight end 2, but generally speaking, though, I like these prices because they come off the board in a range where you can still build solid teams from a structural perspective. So you can pair them up with a Jamar Chase and a Puka Nacua, and then you have guys in the 3rd and 4th round where you can start hammering away at running back. Jeremiah Love and Breece Hall are 2 guys that I would love to pair with a Jamar and a Bowers, or like a Puka and a McBride. And then in the 5th round, in 4th and 5th round, you can also get some solid guys, whether that be like a DeAndre Swift or a Bashal Tutin or Travion Henderson. Not really, because you don't have running back depth. I like Travion Henderson for teams where he is my 3rd running back. You can even get a David Montgomery if you don't have a running back yet on the roster. But you can get everything. You can get everything if you're taking Brock Bowers and Trey McBride at these prices. You get the elite wide receiver, and then you can add quality running backs to your roster. So I'm fine with their prices. I'm not a big fan of Tyler Warren's price. I have him ranked lower than this. Colston Loveland and Tucker Kraft are the 2 other guys that really stand out to me. They are 2 of my favorite picks at cost. So if you're waiting a little bit past the tier of Bowers and McBride, those are 2 guys that I would have circled on my draft boards, because I really don't want to be waiting for my tight end 1 much past Kraft. I would love to lock in one of those guys. And if you're going to do so and pull the trigger on a top 8 tight end, I would like Colston Loveland or Tucker Kraft at cost. They are my 2 favorite values. But if you do wait, there are 2 ways you can go about this. I like the price on Kittle. I think he could go a little bit further down draft boards for people who are a little bit more scared of the Achilles injury and he's coming off of it. And then Kincaid is the other like mid to late round tight end that I do like the price on. We've known Dalton Kincaid hasn't necessarily been healthy over the last few years. If he can run more routes and maintain something that's close to the levels of efficiency that we've seen in recent years, I think he could be a really nice option in a Josh Allen-led offense. Generally speaking, though, I don't like to spend meaningful draft capital on the middle class of tight ends, like the Jake Fergusons, the Isaiah Likeleys of the world. I just think that usually they are wasted picks, because we know more often than not, someone emerges from the late rounds that is stone cold free and beats out a lot of these mid-tier guys. So if you're going to take anyone, I like Kittle and I like Kincaid. Generally speaking, though, it's either top 8 tight end ending with Tucker Kraft, or it's full-blown punt for me. I do think that Dalton Kincaid at the 1103 could fall into that punt category. So perhaps he can fall in this range, fall in with these cluster of guys. But the other guys that do stick out, Jawan Johnson is an interesting bet. He goes basically free. He's here in the 13th round, posted really good numbers last year from just a flat out output perspective. Really good target earning metrics, posts really solid yardage numbers. So you're just looking at the box score. Jawan Johnson was great last year, and then Jordan Tyson goes down. So you'll have some early season production out of Jawan Johnson at a minimum. And he's at a price where even if that's all you get out of him is 6 weeks of rock solid production, that's enough to pay off at the 13th round. Then you can figure it out from there. The other one, Terrence Ferguson. He is the upside, the slappy pick of the summer. So much buzz about Terrence Ferguson basically functioning as their wide receiver 3. He's not a traditional tight end. He's not lining up in line all that often, if at all. If you're punting tight end, make sure you get Terrence Ferguson on your roster. High-end offense, a unique talent. This guy had like basically a 20-yard ADOT last year. He was a downfield weapon. And now you're going to get that out of him as well as some more schemed up underneath intermediate targets. There's a path to volume. There's a path to routes. Terrence Ferguson is a really interesting bet, in my opinion. The other ones that I do enjoy making are Chigo Okonkwo. I think Stephon Diggs has arrived, but the target competition in Washington is still limited, and he's an awesome playmaker. His ball in hand, his open field playmaking ability is truly special at the tight end position. There's not a lot of guys who move and create yards after the catch quite like Chigo Okonkwo. There had been some steam about him in the offseason in training camp. So I think that at this price of basically free, just see what happens, see how he fits in terms of the target tree, the target totem pole in Washington this year. Take the stab. The last name that I'll throw out is Kenyon Sadiq, goes in the 14th round. This is just a special profile, a special prospect, uber athletic, runs a ridiculous 40-yard dash time. So I would just throw the dart and see what happens, because there aren't many tight ends in the history of the NFL who, from a physical and measurables perspective, stack up with Kenyon Sadiq. He's basically free. So just close your eyes, see what happens. If you're taking Sadiq, you're taking multiple tight ends anyways. You don't have to start him right off the rip. So with guys like Kenyon Sadiq, Chigo Okonkwo, I would pair them with someone who we know is going to be running routes. So whether that be like a Dalton Schultz, a Hunter Henry, a Jawan Johnson, pair them with someone who has some sort of a floor. You're comfortable starting them week 1. And then if one of those guys does break out, you've just got a stone cold smash on your hands. So altogether, much like how I'm playing quarterback, take a nice price on one of the elite guys or just punt. You probably can't make everything work that I've talked about in this video. You can't have a high-end wide receiver and then fill out quality running backs in the first couple of rounds alongside an elite quarterback and an elite tight end. It's basically impossible to make all of that happen unless there's some dramatic slides in your draft room. So pick and choose, but generally speaking, that's how I would approach each of the positions in these drafts this year. Okay, so I went on for about a half an hour about the market, my observations, my takeaways, how I'm approaching each position this year. After all that, it is time to show y'all some example teams, how I'm applying those thoughts and takeaways to actual drafts. So I've got 4 teams here. These aren't like mock drafts. I'm not hopping in the sleeper lobby with bots. These aren't teams that I've actually drafted, but based on consensus ADP, these teams are reasonable. They can be drafted. And I understand not every league is the same. Not every platform has the same ADP. That's not entirely the point of this exercise. It's just more so to show how I would put those thoughts and opinions into action about how I'm playing the ADP landscape in its totality and how I'm addressing each position strategically. So I understand not every one of these teams is entirely feasible if your league is a little bit sharper, but let's jump into it. Across the board, I have teams from the 101, the 104, the 108, and the 112. Break them down real quick to just show you guys once again how I am putting those plans into action and how I would actually draft based on the ADP landscape this year. So from the 101, starting with Jahmyr Gibbs, that one's easy in my opinion. He is the consensus 101 for me. Not much to say there. Then I follow it up like we were talking about with 2 guys who I believe could be legitimate difference makers, top 6 wide receivers. That is Nico Collins and Malik Neighbors for me. Neighbors may not be there for you at the 301, depending on your league, if someone is particularly bullish on him, but he does hold a 3rd round ADP at the moment. I'm more than okay taking him in the late 2nd or the early 3rd. And then I add another receiver because I do know I have a hammer at running back in Jahmyr Gibbs. So I add another receiver in Jalen Waddle, who I believe is in a tremendous value in drafts this year. He does go at the 412 based on consensus ADP. So I'm happy to take him here because I have him ranked almost a full round ahead. Then, like we were talking about, I do iron out the running backs position before it gets pretty ugly. I get DeAndre Swift here, another pick that's in line with consensus ADP. I'm more than okay starting DeAndre Swift as my RB2 if I can get him at the 501. Then we get a top 8 tight end, Tucker Kraft, the last guy on the board from me who is particularly interesting. I really like Kraft's outlook this year, especially now that there's been positive reports about him being healthy. So settle down the tight end position, find a piece there. Then I just continue to pluck off values and profiles and situations that I'm interested in. RJ Harvey, I really like what he offers as a pass catcher and potentially challenging J.K. Dobbins for some rushing work as well. Josh Downs, he's on a lot of these teams. He's just way too cheap, in my opinion. I have him upwards of 2 rounds ahead of where the market does. He is a tremendous value. So I'm going to be getting a lot of him this year. And then because I don't grab quarterback early in the draft, I don't get one of those elite guys, I grab a Brock Purdy who has historically a really high touchdown rate, and then I pair him with Malik Willis later, who is kind of an upside swing for the fences kind of guy, hoping that he pans out as a rusher. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, he is the one guy that I really like targeting in an ambiguous situation. And then Jaden Reed, I think he's a really nice value as well in what should be a condensed Packers offense. Moving on to the team that I drafted out of the 104, Puka Nacua, cut and dry for me. He is my third overall ranked player. I'm happy to take him at the 104. And then, like we were talking about in the tight end section of this video, I am comfortable grabbing a Brock Bowers or a Trey McBride because I like how in this area of the draft board, you can set up your team pretty nicely at running back and wide receiver. So I grab Bowers, who I hope is the tight end one. And then I followed up with Breece Hall. I get my running back room rolling and then continue to move forward with one of those tier jumping wide receivers that we were talking about in the earlier portions of this video. I have what I believe is the overall wide receiver one. And then I get a guy who, if everything pans out, if he hits that 90th, 95th percentile outcome, this guy could be a top 10 wide receiver as well. And then once again, same story, want to have running back ironed out before we hit the real cliff, the real tier break that comes at Jadarian Price. So I take Bashal Tutin here as my second running back, really bullish on his outlook as an explosive playmaker in a quality offense in Jacksonville, especially I just love Liam Cohen running backs. Add another piece of the Jaguars here. Parker Washington, I've talked about it in the past, far too cheap in redraft leagues. Add him as my third wide receiver. I do think he can deliver wide receiver 2 caliber production or just high-end flex production. He is an easy pick in the 6th round. Then I take another upside swing at running back because I don't have true high-end running back. So I do want to take a swing at a guy who could break out in a big fashion and help lead this running back room. I take Jonathan Brooks here with Chuba Hubbard down, all the buzz that Brooks has been receiving. I think this is a nice price on Brooks. Anywhere in the 7th, I'm really comfortable with Brooks. Another couple of swings at wide receiver in downs. Again, just he's going to be on several of these rosters. Then Mekhi Lemon. I know that there's been some FUD on Lemon recently, but we just have to understand that this is a first-round wide receiver. He is arguably the most talented wide receiver in this draft class. So I'm fine having him on my bench and just seeing how things play out, even if he's not a full-time player early on. I want to have him on this roster and see if he can hit that upside outcome later on in the season and potentially have him as a featured piece of my lineup. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, once again, just a guy who he's priced down because there's uncertainty about his situation. I want to make that bet that he wins out in the backfield and becomes a really valuable fantasy asset. This team, once again, doesn't get one of the elite quarterbacks. So I take 2 stabs. Kyler Murray is far too cheap in redraft leagues. He goes in the 12th round. I'm fine to take him here in the 11th. I would even take him in the 10th or the 9th. That's where I have him ranked. And then I pair him up with Jordan Love because if I'm waiting until the double-digit rounds to start addressing my quarterback room, I do just want to take 2 stabs. It's not expensive. And I know Jordan Love, he's been efficient. He could run hot on touchdowns, and I could get there in that manner. Moving on to the 108 here, I started off with a hero wide receiver in Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he is a clear-cut back half of the first round kind of guy for me. I'm just more than happy. He's as consistent as they come and also features a real ceiling. Then I get my first running back, Kenneth Walker, one of the guys who I am incredibly high on this year, well ahead of the market. He is going to be a staple of my teams, especially the ones that I draft at the back half of the board. Then I follow it up with a pair of those tier jumping wide receivers in Ladd McConkey and Jalen Waddle. Don't need to really further talk about them. They are 2 clear-cut breakout candidates with Mike McDaniel heading to Los Angeles and Jalen Waddle with the potential to consolidate targets in Denver alongside Sean Payton and Bo Nix. Bashal Tutin, once again, if I am drafting in the 5th round and I'm like towards the middle or the back end of the board, Bashal Tutin is going to be there for me a lot if I don't already have a second running back, which is the case. Get the running back room straightened out. And then Jalen Hurts here at the 605. I take one of the elite quarterbacks. It is like 3 slots behind ADP. I don't think it's entirely crazy to think that Jalen Hurts could be there for you at the 605. There's a lot of just casuals who don't like Jalen Hurts, just a lot of negative sentiment about who he is as a player and what he brings to the table. So we could see a slide on Hurts, and I'm willing to scoop that up here at the 605. RJ Harvey, once again, on this roster as a piece who could hit in a big way for this running back room that doesn't really invest true high-end draft capital at the position. Same story with Jonathan Brooks. If he hits, I think he could be a big piece of this lineup. Matthew Golden here as my fourth receiver. I don't love Matthew Golden, the talent. Personally, I thought he was a bad draft pick, and I wasn't optimistic about what he showed in his rookie year. Still, he's going heavily discounted this year. I take him here at the 908. His consensus ADP is in the 11th round. I'm at that price. I'm willing to just take a stab on the fact that I could be wrong about who Matthew Golden is as a player. We know he's all but guaranteed, at least early in this season, to run almost every single route. This is an offense, a quarterback, and a play caller that I want to bet on. So I have Matthew Golden ranked in this range. I have him ranked ahead of ADP, even though I'm not in love with the player as an individual. I understand that there are paths to him hitting, and him hitting in a big way because he is an explosive playmaker. This team, add Dalton Kincaid, a player we talked about in the tight end section, because I do punt tight end to a degree. Dalton Kincaid, if he runs more routes, remains efficient. He could be a really weekly starter at the tight end position. You're not questioning whether you're getting him into your lineup. You're not playing touchdown roulette with him. So I do like Dalton Kincaid for this build. And then I take DeJon Stribling and Keaton Mitchell here. These two picks, to a degree, have some asterisks by them. DeJon Stribling is shooting up draft boards right now. ADP hasn't exactly caught up to him. You can get him at the 1108 right now. I'm not sure if that's something that will be viable come draft time over the next few weeks. You might have to take him in the 10th round, the 9th round, even the 8th round. So I would add an asterisk to it. But if you're drafting right now and your league mates are not woke to the DeJon Stribling buzz, we are all hitting the Strib Club. Make sure you're adding him to your rosters if he is slipping into the double-digit rounds. And then Keaton Mitchell, another guy with an asterisk. I do add him onto this roster because this is right around where I have him ranked, but his consensus ADP is well further down the board. So feel free to try and push it a little bit if you feel like you're in a softer league and your league mates won't be, once again, woke to what Keaton Mitchell could do in a Mike McDaniel-led offense. Next up, and the final team that I drafted is out of the 112 here. Starting things off with Chase Brown and Kenneth Walker. If you're drafting in slots 10, 11, or 12, I think double tapping running back to open things up is the go-to play. I don't think that there's really any other way to do it because once again, you get your running back room solidified. You've got no questions really about having high-end running back production. But then at the 3-4 turn, there's just so many options that you could make at wide receiver. You can feel good about how you've built out your wide receiver room, even though you double tapped running back to open the draft. You don't get one of the truly elite wide receiver options. You can get two of those tier jumpers that we've continually talked about here. I go with Ladd McConkey and Emeka Egbuka. You could pull up Waddle. He's one of my favorite picks as well. And then at the end of the 5th, I continue building out the wide receiver room because we don't address it in the first 2 rounds. I get Mike Evans here, a veteran who has a real path to well over double-digit touchdowns in this offense that has, to a degree, limited target competition and just a play caller and a quarterback that we want to invest in. Then I add Jaden Daniels. He goes at the 512 in terms of consensus ADP. So this is right in line. I said it earlier. Daniels is one of my favorite picks. If he makes it to the end of the 5th or the early 6th, it's just about an auto click for me. Jonathan Brooks, once again, obviously, I have talked about this guy in the past. One of my favorite picks, just betting that he beats out Chuba Hubbard and consolidates this backfield. And then he has the pass catching chops as well to really round out his profile. Josh Downs, once again, on this team, much like some of the other ones. I add on Jordan Addison for some receiver depth. He doesn't have like an enormous ceiling, but I do think given his explosive playmaking ability in the 9th round, he does have that kind of break glass in case of emergency at the flex position. You're just betting on this offense to return to form, and then Addison becoming and maintaining his status as a downfield playmaker who can deliver spike weeks. I add another Minnesota Vikings guy here. I do think that this is an interesting bet to a degree. I also just didn't want to hammer Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt again on every single team that I have. I might be taking JCM more often than Jordan Mason. I talked about it earlier in the video. I'm not sure what his true high-end 95th percentile upside outcome is in Mason, but I do still think he could beat ADP in a big way if he further stretches the gap from Aaron Jones and consolidates the rushing work at the goal line and runs hot on touchdowns. Xavier Worthy, he's a bit of a faller relative to consensus ADP here at the 11-12. He goes more towards the middle of the 11th round. Still, this is, I'm interested in continuing to buy the discounts on Xavier Worthy. We know that to a degree, this offense is going to have to flow through Xavier Worthy as a pass catcher. He just has to work out if the Chiefs are going to be rolling. He's one of a kind in terms of his speed. We could see them try to diversify his usage, not just be that pure vertical playmaker. So he's an interesting bet to make because obviously he's alongside Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. He individually possesses a unique profile. So an interesting bet to make nonetheless. And then I add Keaton Mitchell here. Okay, those are the 4 teams drafted from across the board, the 101, the 104, the 108, and the 112. That is how I would put the strategies, the thoughts, the takeaways that we were talking about earlier into action. I hope this was helpful. Okay, guys, that is going to do it for me here today. I know I rambled a bit, so thank you for staying with me, but I will break down and consolidate, summarize all of my key thoughts and points. Wide receiver, there is only going to be a handful to a dozen guys who really separate from the pack. I believe that is going to carry over from what we saw last season. I think that'll be the case in 2026. So spend a high-end pick on a wide receiver, whether that be one of the first or second round guys like a Jamar, a Puka, a JSN, and Amon-Ra. And then in the middle rounds, take a stab or two at the guys who can tier jump, whether that be Jalen Waddle, Ladd McConkey, Tedero McMillan. But you can pick your poison, Luther Burden. But that's kind of what I'm looking for. High upside guys in the middle rounds and a stud in the early rounds. Running back, don't get boxed out. Just don't get boxed out. I have been a proponent of zero RB or just waiting generally at the position in years past. It just dries up so quickly, and there are very few high upside bets in the middle and late rounds to make in ambiguous situations. So just eat your vegetables, get your running backs in, but still be selective of the guys that you are taking. Don't just pull up poor or questionable profiles for the sake of adding a running back. Generally, my rule here, I would like to have my RB2 on the roster by round 5 when the guys like Bashal Tutin and Jadarian Price are coming off the board. That is kind of the line for me. Quarterback and tight end, it's the same story at both positions. Grab a value at an elite position or just wait. And if you are waiting, throw 2 darts and try to get different archetypes of players with those 2 darts. At quarterback, grab a pocket passer and just play roulette on the touchdown percentage, the touchdown rate like we were talking about earlier, and then grab a rushing guy with some real upside thanks to their legs. Then at tight end, grab a routes-driven bet, someone who you know has a floor because they're going to be on the field all the time, and then swing for the fences with a guy like Terrence Ferguson, Kenyon Siddiq, Chigo Okonkwo. That is how I play the tight end position this year. But that's it. That's it. Long-winded, long video. Thanks again for sticking around. If you've made it this far, I really, really appreciate it. Like the video, drop a sub, leave a comment. It all helps a ton. I really appreciate you guys. But for now, that is going to be it for me. I will see you all next time.